The WWE has given us some epic rivalries like Kane versus The Undertaker, John Cena versus Randy Orton, Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart, and many more. But when it's all said and done, there's one rivalry that didn't only entertain fans, but also rewrote the complete history of WWE. It's the story of an anti-authority rebel versus an evil boss. The tale of a blue-collar common man versus the corporate system. A rivalry that had beer baths, stunners, shocking twists, and wild segments that cemented the WWE as the top wrestling company in the entire world. This is the complete saga of Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Mr. McMahon. But to truly understand the impact of this rivalry, we have to go back to the very beginning. Because by 1997, Vince McMahon's WWF was in serious trouble. WCW had been beating them in the ratings war for over a year and a half, and the gap was only growing. The company's biggest star, Hulk Hogan, had jumped ship, the NWO was the hottest act in professional wrestling, and Vince McMahon's company was desperately searching for its next big thing. What they found was a beer-drinking Texas rattlesnake whose rise had captured the attention of the entire wrestling world. In 1996, Stone Cold Steve Austin won the King of the Ring tournament, cut his infamous Austin 3:16 promo, and then spent the rest of 1996 and 1997 feuding against Bret Hart and building himself into the most compelling anti-hero of the period. His feud with the Hart Foundation ran white-hot throughout the year, framing him as the rebellious American fighting against an entire faction of Canadians. But then came SummerSlam, and things took an unexpected turn. Austin challenged Owen Hart for the Intercontinental Championship, and while he won the title that night, the moment that truly defined the match had nothing to do with the result. A botched piledriver from Owen dropped Austin directly on his head, fracturing his neck and leaving him temporarily paralyzed in the middle of the ring. He somehow rolled Owen up to win the belt, but the damage was done. Weeks later, he was forced to vacate the championship and step away from in-ring competition entirely. But here's where the story gets interesting. Because it was during this enforced time away from the ring that the Austin versus McMahon feud was quietly born. With Austin unable to compete but still burning with frustration, he began taking that anger out on WWF officials every single week. And on the September 22nd episode of Raw, he delivered a stone-cold stunner to his own boss in front of a packed New York crowd. And right there, in that single moment, wrestling history changed forever. From that point on, Austin winning the Royal Rumble in January of 1998 and earning his shot at the WWF Championship at WrestleMania 14 felt like an inevitability. When he defeated Shawn Michaels that night in Boston with Mike Tyson as the special enforcer, the WWF finally had its new top guy. But the real story was only just getting started, because the very next night on Raw, Vince McMahon stepped into the ring with his new champion, and what followed would define the most important chapter of professional wrestling. McMahon's message to Austin the night after WrestleMania was for him to fall in line and become the corporate champion the company needed. He wanted him to stop drinking, stop swearing, clean his act up, and become a proper ambassador for the company. Austin's response was to stun his boss once again, and just like that, the feud was officially underway. What made the whole thing so compelling was how perfectly it mirrored real life. On one side, you had Mr. McMahon, the calculating, power-obsessed boss who had screwed Bret Hart just months prior and believed he owned everything and everyone around him. On the other hand was Steve Austin, the working-class rebel who refused to bend the knee to anyone, no matter the consequences. Every single person who had ever been talked down to by a boss, who had ever bitten their tongue in a meeting, who had ever wanted to tell their employer exactly where to go, they all saw themselves in Stone Cold. On April 13, 1998, Raw aired a show headlined by a teased one-on-one match between Austin and McMahon himself. That episode of Raw defeated WCW Nitro in the ratings war for the first time in 84 consecutive weeks. The Austin and McMahon dynamic had done in a matter of weeks what the rest of the roster couldn't do in a year and a half. Of course, the match itself turned out to be a swerve. Dude Love appeared and laid Austin out, revealing he had aligned himself with the boss. But the tide had already turned. McMahon, knowing he couldn't beat Austin by himself, started hiring goons to dethrone the Texas rattlesnake. Dude Love became McMahon's first handpicked weapon against his champion. At Unforgiven in April and then Over the Edge in May, Foley got 2 cracks at the title, but Austin walked out with the gold both times. With Dude Love exhausted as an option, McMahon moved on to a more dangerous challenger, Kane. At King of the Ring in June, Austin was put in a first blood match against the Big Red Machine with the deck stacked impossibly high. And for once, McMahon's plan actually worked. The Undertaker interfered and accidentally struck Austin with a chair, drawing blood and handing Kane the title. Austin regained it the following night on Raw and then defeated The Undertaker at SummerSlam. The climax of this particular chapter came at Breakdown in September, where Austin was forced to defend the title against both Kane and The Undertaker simultaneously. Austin lost with both brothers pinning him at the same time, leaving the title vacant. But the image that followed on Raw the next night became one of the most iconic moments of the entire era. McMahon stood in the ring, ready to address the title situation, when the arena erupted as the Texas Rattlesnake drove a Zamboni to the ring. Austin then leapt off the Zamboni and laid into his boss as the fans loved every second of it. This period also saw Austin dress up as a cameraman and attack Vince inside a steel cage, and then again beat him up at a hospital. McMahon eventually had Austin fired after the Texan refused to cooperate as a special referee at Judgment Day. But even that wasn't enough to contain Austin's madness. Austin returned the following night, cornered the boss at gunpoint before revealing the gun was a toy. McMahon, by this point so terrified he had visibly urinated himself on live television, had been reduced to the most humiliated man on the planet, and the crowd had never loved anything more. It was pure Attitude Era chaos, but underneath all of it was a very real commercial phenomenon. Raw was winning the ratings war, the WWF was gaining ground every single week, and the Austin versus McMahon feud was the engine driving all of it. But as dominant as these first few months had been, the feud was about to shift into an entirely different gear, one that would produce some of the most dramatic, chaotic, and unforgettable television in wrestling history. If the first half of 1998 was about establishing that Austin and McMahon were at war, then everything that followed Survivor Series that November proved that Vince McMahon was willing to burn the entire company to the ground just to win it. With the title still vacant following the chaos at Breakdown and Judgment Day, McMahon announced a 14-man one-night tournament at Survivor Series to crown a new champion. Vince's son Shane brought Austin back to the company and inserted him in the tournament to get revenge on his father. But then, during the semifinals match between Austin and Mankind, Shane showed his hand and revealed that he was aligned with Vince all along. The father-son duo had screwed the Texas Rattlesnake, and the title went to their hand-picked champion, The Rock. For the majority of 1998, The Rock had been an electrifying babyface who dubbed himself as the People's Champion, but now he had turned heel and become the corporate champion. This set the stage for the January 1999 Royal Rumble, which became one of the most story-heavy Rumble matches in history. McMahon, leveraging every ounce of his power, assigned Austin the dreaded number 1 entry spot. Commissioner Shawn Michaels countered by putting the boss himself in at number 2. So for the first time, Austin and McMahon were going at it one-on-one at the very start of a Royal Rumble match in front of a packed arena. Austin finally got his hands on McMahon, but then got ambushed mid-match by corporation members, climbed back into the match from an ambulance, and still nearly won, until The Rock appeared at ringside and distracted him just long enough for McMahon to sneak the elimination. The fans were furious, and it set up what came next perfectly. McMahon, having won the Rumble, had no interest in cashing it in against his own corporate champion. So he relinquished the shot, only for Commissioner Michaels to rule that the runner-up, Austin, would inherit it automatically. Furious but seeing no other option, McMahon challenged the Rattlesnake to a steel cage match at St. Valentine's Day Massacre with the WrestleMania title shot on the line. Austin proceeded to dismantle his boss inside that cage with the fans rallying behind him, until Paul White, better known as Big Show, made his explosive WWF debut by crashing through the cage mat and hurling Austin into the side of the structure so hard it accidentally sent him to the floor for the win. McMahon's plan had backfired. Austin was going to WrestleMania. But before that, 6 days before WrestleMania, while the corporation was gloating in the ring, Austin drove a beer truck to ringside and drenched the faction in a beer bath that became one of the most infamous segments of the era. At Mania 15, Austin defeated The Rock for the WWF Championship, and the Texas Rattlesnake was back on top. But the story still wasn't done. While Austin successfully defended the title against The Rock at Backlash in April, the real curveball arrived in the weeks that followed, when The Undertaker's Ministry of Darkness kidnapped Vince's daughter, Stephanie McMahon, and attempted a disturbing mock wedding ceremony on live television. Austin, of all people, stormed the ring and saved her. For a while, it looked like Vince might embrace the light and align with Austin to save his daughter. But then on June 7, 1999, everything was turned on its head completely. Standing in the arena with the hood pulled back from his face, the higher power, the mysterious authority figure controlling The Undertaker and the entire ministry from the shadows, was revealed to be Vince McMahon all along. The whole thing, Stephanie's kidnapping, the corporate ministry, all of it, had been one elaborate months-long con designed to mentally destroy Austin. But the Texas Rattlesnake was about to strike back. McMahon's higher power reveal had real consequences, because neither wife Linda nor daughter Stephanie had been let in on the plan. They were pawns in Vince's game just like everyone else, and they weren't happy about it. So, in an act of retribution, the two women announced that they were handing their combined ownership stakes in the WWF directly to Stone Cold Steve Austin. Just like that, the Rattlesnake was the new CEO of the company he'd spent 2 years raising hell on. Austin showed up at WWF headquarters in Stamford wearing cut-off jeans and a tie, turned the entire corporate culture upside down, made the receptionist answer the phone his way, shifted a chunk of Shane McMahon's paycheck over to Mick Foley, and then to add the cherry on the top, emptied a wheelbarrow full of manure directly into Vince's office. Of course, the McMahons weren't going to take any of this lying down. At King of the Ring in June 1999, they challenged Austin to a winner-take-all handicap ladder match, all 100% of WWF ownership hanging in a briefcase above the ring. For most of the match, Austin controlled things in the way you'd expect, dominating both McMahons and getting closer and closer to the briefcase. But the McMahons, true to form, always had something in their back pocket. They had paid off someone in production to raise the briefcase higher just when Austin was about to retrieve it. Shane then shoved the ladder out from under Austin at the critical moment and retrieved the briefcase, handing the victory and full company control back to the family. It was a gut punch for the audience, but it also made sense, because some stories need their villain to win a round before the final reckoning arrives. That reckoning came at Fully Loaded in July 1999, in a match that was dubbed as the end of an era. When most wrestling fans think of end of an era, they think of Triple H versus Undertaker at WrestleMania 28. But over a decade before that, this was the OG end of an era match. The bout itself was a first blood contest for the WWF Championship, with Austin facing The Undertaker. But the stakes were what made it the end of an era. If Austin lost, he could never again challenge for the title. If The Undertaker lost, Vince McMahon would be banished from the WWF forever. It was the ultimate double-or-nothing bet on nearly 2 years of storytelling. Austin survived the chaos and eventually busted The Undertaker open to retain. McMahon, true to the stipulation, disappeared from WWF television. But the story wasn't over. It had one final chapter and a swerve that shook the entire wrestling world. In late 1999, still working through the neck problems that Owen Hart's botched piledriver had caused him 2 years earlier, Austin was written off television after being run over by a car at Survivor Series. He returned nearly a year later in September 2000, but by then, the landscape had shifted. Triple H was the dominant force, The Rock was a mainstream star, and the Austin vs. McMahon chapter felt like it belonged to a different chapter of the company's history. And on April 1st, 2001, at WrestleMania 17 in front of 70,000 people in Houston, Texas, the feud delivered its true, definitive, jaw-dropping conclusion. Austin and The Rock met in the main event in a brutal, emotionally charged collision between the two biggest stars of the Attitude Era. But it was the ending that nobody would ever forget. With the match reaching its climax, Vince McMahon appeared at ringside with a steel chair. Austin took the chair and struck The Rock over and over again. When he finally pinned The Rock and his music hit, the Texas Rattlesnake didn't celebrate alone. He shook Vince McMahon's hand. He cracked open a beer. And the two men who had spent 2.5 years trying to destroy each other stood together in the ring, while Jim Ross lost his mind on commentary, screaming that Stone Cold had sold his soul. The crowd didn't quite know how to process it. Neither did the wrestling industry. Because while the image of Austin and McMahon joining forces was unforgettable, it was the full stop at the end of wrestling's greatest chapter. The Attitude Era had been built on Austin's refusal to give in to Vince McMahon. The moment he finally surrendered, that era ended. But while it was alive, the Austin vs. McMahon saga drew record ratings, broke attendance records, and cemented WWE as the top wrestling company in the world. Since then, the company has tried to recapture the magic with Daniel Bryan's Yes movement and Cody Rhodes finishing his story, but nothing has been able to match the sheer electricity of Stone Cold making his boss's life a living hell during the Attitude Era. And if you want to relive the peak of WWE during the Attitude Era in its entirety, check out this video next.